The call came late in the afternoon, just as I was pulling my kettle off the stove. Ethan's name lit up my phone, and I smiled before I answered. He rarely called in the middle of a workday. "Hey, Ma," he said, his voice tight with excitement. "I've got some news." I could already guess. I'd heard the way he talked about Camilla lately, the sudden polish in his words, the rehearsed calm. "She wasn't just another girlfriend. We're getting engaged," he said. "She said yes last night." I pressed the warm kettle to my chest and closed my eyes for a second. My boy was going to be someone's husband. "That's wonderful, Ethan," I said softly, willing my voice not to tremble. "She makes you happy?" "Yeah," he breathed. "She does, and Ma, her family, they're kind of a big deal. They've been around forever, like really old money. You'll meet them." He paused, then added quickly, "They're hosting a formal dinner next Friday. Just a small gathering, me, you, Camilla, her parents, maybe her siblings. Nothing too crazy." My heart thudded slowly. I looked down at my hands, lined, calloused, always busy. I imagined sitting across from a table of porcelain women and men in cufflinks, slicing their lamb with silver knives, smiling with lips that didn't move. "A formal dinner," I repeated. "They want to meet me?" "Of course. You're my mom. Camilla's mom is, well, she's a little particular, but it'll be fine. I'll be with you." I knew that tone. The same one he used as a boy when he was trying to convince me he hadn't broken the window. He wasn't sure it would be fine at all. I smiled faintly. "Of course I'll come." "Great," he said, and I could hear the relief. "And Ma, maybe. Don't bring your gardening shoes, okay? And maybe not that big coat with the missing button?" I laughed softly. "I'll figure something out. I know you will." We hung up, and I stood there for a moment in my quiet kitchen, looking at the steam curling from the kettle. My son was getting married into a world I'd never been part of, and they were about to meet the woman they thought had scrubbed floors for 30 years. Let them. After Ethan's call, I sat by the window with my lukewarm tea and watched the street below. A child rode a bike too fast for the curve, and a neighbor waved to another from across the fence. My neighborhood was old, lived in, the kind of place where paint chipped slowly, and people didn't apologize for it. I had chosen this life quietly. Ethan thought I was a retired janitor, and in a way, he wasn't wrong. I had cleaned, I had scrubbed, I had bent over sinks with rubber gloves until my back ached. But that wasn't all of it. That wasn't even most of it. In the early years, after Ethan's father passed, I took whatever work I could find, cleaning houses, offices, motel rooms, anything that paid. But I had something others didn't. I watched. I listened. The homes I cleaned belonged to men who spoke carelessly in front of me, as if I were invisible. They left bank statements on kitchen counters, stock tips on voicemails. Over time, I learned where to look, what to ask subtly, when to move money. I took every dollar I earned, and I saved it. Then I invested it cautiously at first. Then boldly. Quietly. I never bought a new car. I never moved out of this modest house. I never stopped wearing secondhand coats. But I built a fortune, one that lived in real estate titles, offshore accounts, and businesses listed under shell names. I never needed luxury to feel rich. I just needed the choice. I told Ethan none of this. Not because I didn't trust him, but because he never asked. Because when he looked at me, he still saw the mother who packed his lunch with coupons and wore holes into her shoes before buying new ones. And maybe that was how it should be. He believed I was just a cleaning woman who had scrimped and saved to raise a good son. Let him believe it. Let her family believe it too. Because when people think you're poor, they show you who they really are. And sometimes that's exactly what you need. Ruth came over that Sunday afternoon, carrying a tin of lemon cookies and her usual frown of concern. She had been my neighbor for almost 20 years, the kind of friend who didn't need to ask what was wrong before making tea. When I told her about Ethan's engagement and the dinner, she set the tin down a little too hard on the counter. "You're not serious," she said. "Those people will eat you alive." I laughed softly, but she didn't join me. Ruth had always been blunt, the sort of woman who could see storms forming long before the thunder. "They'll judge you, Margot." You know they will. The way you talk, the way you dress, the way you stir your tea. Those old money families, they like their own kind. They don't like surprises. I sipped my tea, pretending to consider it. But deep down, I already knew she was right. I could still hear Ethan's careful tone on the phone, the hesitation when he mentioned the dinner, the way he softened his words when he said, "Just a small gathering." He was trying to prepare me without saying it. He was embarrassed. Not of me exactly, but of how they might see me. "Let them judge," I finally said, placing my cup down. "I've been judged before." "You don't need to prove anything to them," Ruth insisted. "You could make an excuse, say you're sick." I smiled. "I want to see the woman who's going to take care of my boy." Ruth crossed her arms. "Then at least show them you're not what they think you are." I shook my head. "No, I'll go as exactly who they think I am. The cleaning lady, the poor widow, the mother who got lucky enough to have a son that climbed his way up." Ruth stared at me, confused. "Why?" I looked out the window at the gray sky. "Because people tell the truth when they think they're above you." She sighed, defeated. "Just be careful, Margot." I nodded, but in my mind, I was already planning what to wear and what not to. The day of the dinner, I stood in front of my small bedroom mirror and studied my reflection. The morning light came through the thin curtains, making everything look faded, which helped. My hair had grayed years ago, but I never dyed it. I brushed it back into a low bun, plain and neat. The dress I chose was the same one I wore to Ethan's graduation, navy blue, worn at the seams, with a small tear I stitched by hand. Over it, I pulled on my old beige coat. The hem was frayed, the lining torn. It made me look softer somehow, smaller, the kind of woman who apologizes for taking up space. My shoes were scuffed, the soles thinning. I had better ones in the closet, Italian leather, a quiet luxury I bought for myself once I could afford to, but tonight wasn't about comfort. Tonight was about playing a part. I opened my jewelry box, filled with small lies and buried truths. The diamond ring I always wore, my mother's heirloom, caught the light. I turned it once between my fingers, then slipped it off. Without it, my hand looked almost fragile. I replaced it with a thin, gold-plated band I'd bought years ago from a thrift shop. Cheap, dull, believable. My earrings were small plastic pearls, the kind that lose their shine if you wear them too long. I didn't put on any makeup, just a touch of lip balm to keep my lips from cracking. For a moment, I barely recognized the woman in the mirror. But maybe this was who they already imagined me, to be an old mother from nowhere, worn down by work, grateful just to be invited. I picked up my purse, the same one I used for grocery runs, and took one last look at myself. The disguise felt too easy, almost natural. Maybe because it wasn't really a disguise at all. I had lived this version of myself once, and tonight I would live her again. The driveway alone was longer than the block I grew up on. My cab rolled through the open iron gates slowly, past manicured hedges shaped like swans and trees, pruned into painful-looking precision. The Langford home rose at the top of the hill like something out of a storybook wide. Pale stone, tall arched windows, ivy climbing its sides like a secret trying to reach the sky. The kind of place that didn't look lived in, only admired. I stepped out of the car and was greeted not by family, but by formality. A man in a black suit, with a tight jaw, opened the door for me, giving me a glance that started at my worn coat and ended at my discount shoes. His smile didn't touch his eyes. "You must be Ethan's mother." He said it like it pained him to guess. "Yes," I answered, holding my purse with both hands. "Margot." He stepped aside. "They're expecting you." Inside, the air was chilled, not just in temperature, but in feeling. The floors were marble, cream with gold veins, and my shoes echoed too loudly with each step. Chandeliers dangled like frozen waterfalls, and portraits of severe-looking ancestors lined the halls. Every surface gleamed wood, polished until it bled reflection, glass without a single smudge. I felt like I had walked into a museum where I didn't belong. 2 maids passed me without a word, one glancing sideways at my coat, the other eyeing the frayed hem with something close to pity or disgust. At the end of the hallway, I saw Ethan waiting, his hands shoved in his pockets. He looked nervous. He always tugged his ear when he was. When he saw me, he smiled, but it was strained, flickering. "You made it?" he said, kissing my cheek. "They're in the sitting room." I nodded, letting him guide me through another corridor. Everything in the house smelled like money and lavender. Ethan didn't say much else. Just a few rehearsed lines about how nice they were, how I shouldn't worry, how they were excited to meet me, but I could hear it in his voice. He was hoping I'd just get through it without embarrassing him. I didn't blame him. I had no intention of giving them anything real to see. The sitting room was all cream and gold, with thick curtains drawn halfway and a fireplace too clean to have ever known real fire. A tray of crystal glasses sat untouched on a lacquered table, beside a silver dish of nuts no one had dared disturb. It was the kind of room where even breathing felt like a disruption. Ethan stepped in first. "Mother, this is Regina and Charles Langford." They rose from identical armchairs like synchronized swans. Camilla sat off to the side on a velvet settee, her legs crossed and her smile frozen. Regina reached out first, or rather, extended her hand halfway, as if unsure if I'd kiss it or stain it. Her earrings glinted like icicles, and her gaze slid over me like I was a stain on the rug. I held out my hand. She didn't take it. She merely looked at it, then at me, and finally, back at her seat. Charles Langford stepped forward next, a stiff, silver-haired man with an aristocrat's face and a banker's mouth. He didn't smile, didn't speak, just gave me a small nod, like I'd arrived early to clean the windows. My hand stayed hanging in the air a moment longer before I let it drop to my side. "Thank you for having me," I said softly, glancing at Camilla. She didn't meet my eyes. She was inspecting her manicured nails. Ethan stood beside me, shifting uncomfortably. "Shall we sit?" he asked, voice cracking slightly. Regina gestured to the farthest chair, the one with the low back and no armrests. I sat carefully, adjusting my coat around me. The silence dragged like a taut string. Then Regina asked, "So, Margot, what do you do?" Her tone was clipped, almost amused. "I'm retired," I answered. "Cleaning work, mostly." She blinked once. "Oh. That was all, just oh." No follow-up, no polite pretense. Charles sipped his whiskey and stared into the fireplace. Regina reached for her glass and took a slow sip, then said, "Camilla tells us you live in East Hollow?" "That's right." "I see." Another sip. The silence thickened. No one asked me what I liked. No one asked me how I'd raised a son like Ethan. They didn't see a mother. They saw something else. And for now, that was exactly what I wanted. The dining room looked like it had been carved out of an old palace-long, heavy oak table, tall-backed chairs upholstered in deep green velvet, crystal chandelier hanging like a threat above our heads. Silverware gleamed beneath the candlelight. The table was set for 8, though only 6 of us were present. Camilla's brother and sister joined just before we were seated. I could tell immediately who they took after. Her brother, Julian, was tall, smug, and bored. Her sister, Eloise, wore white as if mourning the idea of my presence. I took the seat they offered, at the far end of the table, an afterthought. Servants glided by, pouring wine into glasses I didn't reach for. Ethan sat beside me, but somehow still far away. Camilla was across from me, flanked by her parents like a trophy in a glass box. The meal began with soup. Conversation, however, started colder. "So," Regina said, tilting her head in mock interest, "Ethan mentioned you were in the cleaning business?" I nodded. "That's right, for a long time." "Domestic work?" "Mostly. Offices, hotels, sometimes private homes." "How honest," she said, as if describing a pet that refused to sit. Charles didn't look up from his plate. Julian cleared his throat. "You must have heard all kinds of stories then, working in people's homes." "Oh, I did," I replied with a smile. "People say the most revealing things when they think you're invisible. That earned a flicker of something from him, uncertainty maybe, or boredom interrupted." "And what do you do now?" Eloise asked, stabbing her fork into her salad like it had insulted her. "Retired," I said simply. "I keep busy." "Hobbies?" "Gardening, reading. I volunteer sometimes." "How quaint," Regina murmured, sipping her wine. Camilla didn't say a word, not once. She avoided my eyes, her smile frozen, eyes cast slightly downward like she didn't know how to acknowledge me without embarrassment. Ethan tried once to interject, "Mom's always been the strongest person I know." But Regina cut him off with a look. The roast was served. The wine flowed. And with every bite, I became more certain. They didn't care who I was. They had already decided. I was someone they could ignore. Someone their daughter would tolerate for the sake of appearances. I kept smiling. I cut my food quietly. I waited. Because the night was still young, and masks tend to slip when the wine is poured deep. It started small, just a sideways glance. A smirk passed between siblings like a secret joke. But by the second course, it had turned into something colder, sharper. Julian leaned toward Eloise and whispered just loud enough to be overheard. "Is her coat from a thrift store? Or is it just vintage in all the wrong ways?" Eloise laughed into her wine, her perfectly lacquered nails tapping against the glass. I didn't flinch. I reached for my water with steady fingers, even as the shame pressed hot under my skin. I had worn the coat deliberately. Let them think it was thrifted, borrowed, a relic. They didn't know it had been the last gift from Ethan's father before he passed, threadbare now from years of winter walks and hard days. But to them, it was just another marker of my worth, or lack thereof. Julian wasn't finished. "So, do you like iron napkins at dinner too?" he asked. "Old habits die hard, I imagine." Camilla let out a short breath, half a laugh, then looked down. "Julian, please," she said, but there was no weight behind it. No defense. Ethan stared at his plate, pushing peas around like he could shape them into something less humiliating. "That's enough," he muttered once, but no one acknowledged him. Charles raised his glass to no one in particular. "I think it's admirable," Eloise said, resting her chin on her hand and batting her lashes. "To come to a dinner like this and not feel the need to upgrade anything." I smiled at her then. A slow, measured thing. "Sometimes, when you've had enough life behind you," I said softly, "you stop needing upgrades." She blinked. The moment passed. Dessert arrived, something delicate and French impossible to eat without cracking the sugar top. As I tapped it with my spoon, Julian leaned over again. "So, what do you think of Camilla's diamond, Mrs. Davis? Bigger than anything you've ever cleaned, I bet." I looked up, met his eyes directly for the first time. "Oh, I've handled diamonds far bigger," I said, voice calm. "But they don't impress me. It's what people cover up with them that usually catches my attention." Julian froze. The table fell silent for a breath too long. Then Eloise chuckled, uneasy. "She's funny. I'm observant," I corrected gently. They laughed less after that. But the damage had been done. They thought they'd humiliated me. What they didn't know was that all they'd done was show me exactly who they were. And that was worth more than diamonds. Halfway through dessert, my throat began to tighten. The room, despite its vaulted ceilings and open windows, felt smaller by the second. Laughter rang like cold bells across the table, and I could feel eyes crawling over me, measuring, dismissing, labeling. My fork clinked against the plate as I set it down. "Excuse me," I said softly, rising to my feet. No one stopped me. I walked calmly through the glittering halls, past portraits that stared down with disapproval, until I found the guest bathroom tucked behind a white-paneled door. I stepped in, turned the lock, and leaned against it as the silence swallowed me whole. The bathroom was pristine. Marble counters, gold fixtures, a vase of lilies arranged like they were afraid to bloom. I moved to the sink and gripped its edges, letting the tears come. Not loud sobs, just the quiet, bitter kind that roll down your cheeks and die at your collarbone. I stared at the reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at me was small, gray at the roots, too plain for a room like this. My coat sagged on my shoulders. My eyes were rimmed with fatigue. I looked like everything they believed me to be. A poor, old mother. An afterthought. An embarrassment. I pulled a tissue from the silver box and dabbed carefully at the corners of my eyes, avoiding smudging the last dignity I still wore. Then I straightened, tucked the loose hair behind my ear, and whispered, just loud enough for the mirror to hear me. "Let them think I'm nothing, because people reveal themselves, when they think they're in the presence of nothing. I washed my hands, dried them on a towel that probably cost more than my week's groceries, and unlocked the door. As I stepped back into the hallway, I didn't carry shame with me. I carried silence. Stillness, something colder and more watchful. And just before I turned the corner, I heard them. Their voices were faint at first, like murmurs carried on polished marble, but as I moved closer to the corridor that led back to the dining room, they became clearer, sharp edges slicing through the air. "She's not the kind of mother I imagined," Camilla said. Her voice wasn't cruel, but it was dismissive, hollow in a way that hurt more than mockery. I thought she'd at least make an effort. She wore that coat like she didn't even care. Ethan sighed. I heard it in his voice. "She's not like your family, Camilla. She's different. She's embarrassing," Camilla whispered. "How can I introduce her to our friends? What will they think?" There was a long pause, and I could almost hear Ethan shrinking into himself. "She raised me alone. She worked hard her whole life." "I know," Camilla replied, softer now. "But hard work isn't the same as grace or class." My fingers curled slowly at my sides. My breathing slowed. I didn't step forward. I didn't make a sound. I stood in that corridor, back pressed to the cool wall, and listened to my son hesitate again. I thought of the diamonds on Camilla's hand, of Regina's smirk, Julian's cruelty, Eloise's laughter. I thought of the chair they gave me with no arms. I thought of Ethan's silence. And something inside me shifted. It wasn't anger. Not yet. It was clarity. I had come into this house dressed as the version of myself they were most comfortable insulting. I had handed them that version on a silver platter, and they showed me exactly who they were. I straightened, adjusted my coat, a decision formed so quietly, I almost didn't notice it. I would play the role they expected just a little longer, but when the curtain fell, they would not forget me. They wanted to believe I was invisible. Let them, because soon I would be unforgettable. After Ethan's father died, I didn't cry for long. I couldn't afford to. There was rent to pay, formula to buy, and a little boy with wide eyes who looked at me like I could fix the world. So I rolled up my sleeves and cleaned. At first, it was just survival, scrubbing office toilets at midnight, cleaning kitchens that reeked of cigar smoke, folding towels for women who called me honorable. But I paid attention. I listened. I watched. And in those quiet corners of other people's lives, I saw opportunity. There was a man whose wife left him because he lost everything in stocks. I asked what happened. He talked for hours, thinking I was too dumb to understand. I took notes. Later, I read books from the library until the spine split. I found patterns. I invested slowly, cautiously. I took my cleaning money and bought into a dying dry cleaner with a foreclosure notice taped to its window. I fixed it, sold it, then a laundromat. Then a small real estate office. I kept my name off everything. I used holding companies. I signed as MD Holdings. Let people assume it was a man. By the time Ethan finished college, I had 3 properties, 2 streams of passive income, and a closet full of cheap coats I still wore because it was easier to be underestimated. I never remarried. I didn't want to share what I had built. I didn't want anyone else's name on what I had done. And the house I live in now, the little cottage with the chipping paint and the creaky porch swing, it's not a place I got stuck in. It's the place I chose. It's quiet, modest, mine. Ethan doesn't know any of this. He grew up knowing love, not luxury. He believed what he saw. I let him. Because the world is more honest when it thinks you have nothing. And some days, honesty is worth more than gold. But now, with what I've seen in that mansion, with what I've heard, I realize it's time to shift the balance. The Langfords aren't just arrogant. They're dangerous in the way spoiled people can be when they think they own the story. So I decided to turn the page. The private investigator was the same man I once hired to track a dishonest tenant who fled with 3 months' rent and a broken lease. His name was Victor, and he looked like someone who belonged behind tinted windows. Quiet. Sharp. He never asked unnecessary questions. When I called him, I said only, I need a profile. On the Langfords. He didn't ask why. He just said, give me a week. It took 3 days. He met me at a quiet cafe downtown. Slid a brown envelope across the table like we were in a spy movie. Inside was a dossier thicker than I expected. They keep it clean on paper, he said. But dig deep enough, and the cracks show. Regina Langford wasn't born Regina Langford. She was Regina Milson, daughter of a real estate mogul who declared bankruptcy in the 90 seconds after a fraud investigation. The Langfords had bailed the family out. That marriage was arranged in its own polite, high society way. Charles Langford? He hadn't run a business in years. His current wealth came from trust funds and a few inflated investments. One of his ventures, a hedge fund, quietly dissolved last year. The SEC had sniffed around, but it was Camilla's name that stopped me cold. She's been engaged before, Victor said, sipping his coffee. Twice, in fact. Both men came from old money. One walked away. The other, well, let's just say the wedding was called off 6 weeks before the date, and he signed over a sizable business stake before leaving town. I stared down at the photos in the folder, Camilla, smiling. One fiancé with his hand on her waist, another standing beside her in front of a yacht. Both looking smitten, both now vanished from her life. And Ethan, I asked? He's her cleanest mark yet. Young, promising, not too suspicious. But I did find something else. Victor slid a final page toward me. Bank activity, a holding company with Langford fingerprints, a quiet, recent interest in Ethan's startup through intermediaries. Small shares here and there, nothing obvious, but unmistakable. She's not marrying your son, Victor said quietly. She's acquiring him. I nodded, closed the folder, and placed a crisp bill on the table. They think I'm just a poor old woman, I murmured. Let them. Because now I had more than suspicion. Now I had leverage. The Langford name carried weight, but it was mostly air. Victor's file was thick with details, but the one that stood out most was simple. They were bleeding money. Slowly. Quietly. And no one was supposed to notice. Their family fund had been chipped away over the years, bad investments, masked by leveraged real estate, dissolving hedge plays, and whispered settlements from business disputes they didn't want going public. The mansion looked like marble, but the foundation was rot. It was all show now. Polished antiques, staff in tailored uniforms, wine served from decanters bought on credit. Camilla's sudden interest in Ethan hadn't been coincidence. She'd been at his pitch event 6 months ago. I'd found a photo in the file, Camilla, seated at a table in the back, expression unreadable, eyes locked on my son as he spoke about his platform and Series A funding. She had moved quickly after that. A chance meeting, a fast romance, a few curated Instagram moments. And now this engagement. Ethan's startup wasn't a household name yet, but it was promising. The tech was sound, the patents were filed, and his co-founders had just declined a buyout offer that made headlines in their little corner of Silicon Valley. They didn't want Ethan. They wanted his future. I stared at a photo of Camilla in a crisp blazer, her hand on Ethan's chest, smiling up at him like he was the prize. And I wondered, not for the first time, if my son had ever noticed that he was being hunted. But the truth was harder to admit. He didn't want to notice. To a boy raised on secondhand clothes and single mother grit, the Langfords offered a kind of approval he'd never dared dream of. Old money respectability, a last name that opened doors. He thought he was walking into love, but he was walking into a transaction. And unless I stepped in, he wouldn't realize the cost until everything he'd built was no longer his. I didn't confront him. Not directly. If there's one thing life has taught me, it's that truth must be invited, not forced. So I tested him. Gently, quietly. I needed to know, was my son blind, or was he complicit? One morning, over coffee in my kitchen, I brought it up. The kind of casual curiosity only a mother could fake. Ethan, I asked, Camilla seems refined. Is she okay with your lifestyle? Startups aren't exactly predictable. He smiled, boyish. She's supportive. Says she believes in my vision. I nodded slowly. But what if it doesn't work out? The company, I mean. Would she still be there? He hesitated. Just a flicker. Yeah, I think so. Then a pause. Why? I shrugged, just wondering what kind of woman she is. I like knowing what kind of family I'm marrying into. His smile faltered. You mean the Langfords? I mean her, I said. Not her last name. He didn't answer right away. Just looked into his mug like it held something deeper than coffee. Later that week, I tested him again. I told him I'd heard of an investment opportunity, a risky one, but with heart. A nonprofit trying to build tech education in underserved areas. Sounds great, he said. But that's not something Camilla would jump at. Her parents are pretty conservative with money. So if you invested, I asked gently, would you do it quietly? He blinked. You mean, not tell them? Would you do it at all? He ran his hand through his hair. I don't know, Ma. Maybe when things are more stable. We've got the wedding and her dad wants to restructure some of the shares. There it was. I smiled softly and said nothing more. Because I wasn't angry. Not yet. I was disappointed. The boy I raised knew how to build something from nothing. But I needed to know if he still remembered why we built things at all. The next test wouldn't be a question. It would be a choice. And I wouldn't be the one asking. There's a particular silence that only comes in a lawyer's office, the kind where truth gets carved into paper, permanent and cold. I sat across from my estate attorney, Marla Jennings, as she read through the updated clauses with that same steady voice she'd used when I first drew up my will years ago. This language gives you flexibility, she said, pointing to the line about conditional inheritance. You can revisit it later if you change your mind. I nodded. Good. That's exactly what I need. The truth was, I didn't want to disinherit Ethan. I loved my son more than heir, but love without boundaries is just enabling. And right now, I couldn't trust the version of him that flinched under the weight of Camilla's approval. So I cut him out temporarily. The clause was clear. Ethan would receive the full estate only if, within the next 18 months, he demonstrated integrity independent of financial influence. He wouldn't know it existed, not yet. I tucked the document into a secure folder, locked it in a drawer, and exhaled. And then I did something I hadn't planned. I created a second trust. Quiet, unassuming, assigned to an anonymous beneficiary for now, but in my heart, I knew who it was for. Because in this world, blood wasn't the only thing that deserved legacy. And if Ethan couldn't remember who he was, maybe someone else would carry on what I built. I walked out of that office with nothing on my face but calm. Let them think the old mother in the coat had nothing to leave behind. Because when the time came, what I left wouldn't just be wealth. It would be a message. To Ethan, to Camilla, to anyone who ever looked at me and saw less. 2 weeks later, Ethan called me. His voice was buzzing, not just excited, but electric. Ma, he said breathless, something crazy just happened. We got a funding inquiry from a major player. Shell firm, but it's real money. Serious offer. No names yet, just initials. VCR Holdings. I smiled. Unseen. Congrats, baby, I said, stirring soup on the stove like nothing was different. What are the terms? They're generous, he admitted. Equity at a lower ask than anyone else. No board seat required. They just want quarterly updates and ethical transparency clauses. Weird, right? Not weird, I replied. Smart, he chuckled. You sound like you like them already. I like people who don't need to sit at the table to set the tone, I said. What are you going to do? We're talking internally, he said. Camilla's dad thinks we should hold off, wait for legacy investors. But this offer feels different. Like it sees us, not just the numbers. I said nothing, letting the silence stretch. Because it wasn't just money I was offering. It was a test. VCR Holdings Victor, Camilla, Ruth. A nod to every person who unknowingly helped me build the path to this moment. Through them, I could watch without being seen. Would Ethan take the deal based on merit? Or would he cave to Camilla's pressure and chase prestige? This wasn't about control. It was about vision. And if he still had the eyes to see clearly. The cafe was glass-walled and sun-drenched, tucked into the Upper East Side of the city where even the air carried a sense of curated importance. I hadn't planned to be there, not exactly. But something told me to follow the thread that morning. Camilla was having brunch with two women I didn't recognize. Hair pulled tight, heels that clacked like threats, their laughter sharp and practiced. I spotted them through the window and, on impulse, stepped into the cafe wearing oversized sunglasses, a vintage scarf, and the kind of matte lipstick that blurred age. I ordered a tea, kept my head down, and took the table behind them. Their voices weren't loud, but they weren't careful either. "She still lives in that little house, right?" one woman asked. "Oh, God," Camilla groaned. "It's not a house. It's a glorified shed. You should have seen her coat. I swear it had dust stitched into the seams." They laughed. "She's, what, a retired maid?" Camilla didn't miss a beat. "Practically a peasant," she said. "But Ethan's sweet, naive. He thinks loyalty is nobility or something. It's cute." Another sip of mimosa. Another dagger. "Anyway, once we're married, I'll push him toward a board seat somewhere with real visibility. The startup stuff is fine, but we need to think dynasty. And that means cutting emotional strings." "Like Mommy," the other whispered. Camilla smirked. "Exactly." I sat there, tea growing cold, fingers steady on the porcelain. She had just confirmed everything Victor's file hinted at, and more. This wasn't about love. This wasn't even about legacy. This was about erasure. She wanted Ethan, but not where he came from. Not the mess of human grit and survival that made him who he was. She wanted to scrape him clean and repackage him. But I wasn't going anywhere. And the next time she saw me, I wouldn't be invisible. I would be unforgettable. The Langfords threw their gala like they were hosting royalty, black tie, valet parking, champagne flowing like it was spring water from the Alps. Their foundation supported innovative youth leadership this year. A performance, really. More about photos than philanthropy. I arrived alone. No fanfare, no escort. Just a sleek black gown tailored to glide instead of cling. A low chignon and a pair of earrings I'd once seen auctioned for a small fortune. Quiet power. Not noise. No one recognized me. And that was the point. Regina Langford passed me in the foyer and nodded politely. Charles offered a neutral smile. "Camilla?" She didn't even blink. I stood 3 feet from her while she praised her own dress to a Vogue contributor, oblivious to the woman behind the diamonds who had once walked through her door in cracked heels and thrift store tweed. I watched Ethan from across the ballroom. He looked tired. Not physically, but inside, like someone realizing they'd boarded the wrong train too late to jump. I circled the room once, then again. People greeted me like I belonged. A senator's wife complimented my necklace. A venture capitalist offered me his card. I accepted it with a slight smile, said nothing, and slipped it into my clutch. Camilla eventually made her way to the stage with a champagne flute, her voice buttery over the mic. She thanked the donors. She praised her parents. She even name-dropped Ethan's startup as the kind of disruptive brilliance we need more of. I raised my glass. Not in a toast, in warning, because tonight wasn't about exposure. It was about stage setting. Let them bask under the lights. They had no idea who was about to pull the curtain. They saved the crown jewel for last, lot 47. A striking oil portrait from a Spanish surrealist, one of those pieces that whispered wealth to those who understood and shouted nonsense to those who didn't. Charles Langford leaned slightly forward as the auctioneer described its provenance. I saw the glint in his eye, ownership masked as appreciation. The opening bid was impressive. He raised his paddle with the quiet arrogance of a man who believed no one would challenge him. I waited. "Another bid." "From the back," Charles countered, casually. I waited again. The auctioneer's voice echoed across the marble ballroom. Sharp as silver. 160,000. Do I hear 170? I raised my paddle. Calm. One hand only. Gasps rippled through the back rows. Charles's smile stiffened. He adjusted in his seat, recalculated. 180, he said. 190, I countered. Someone whispered, "Who is she?" I didn't look. I didn't need to. Charles hesitated, then forced a polite grin. 200. I raised my paddle without a word. 210. The room fell to a hush. He stared across the room at me, lips slightly parted. Regina leaned into him, whispering something urgent. Camilla was frozen beside Ethan, her flute of champagne trembling just enough to be noticed. 210,000 going once. Charles exhaled slowly, then lowered his paddle. Going twice. The gavel struck. Sold. The applause was light but pointed. Polite on the surface, charged beneath. I stood and walked calmly to the assistant to finalize the paperwork, the soft train of my gown whispering across marble as if it had always belonged there. No introductions, no name offered. Only the echo of a bid too confident to ignore. Let them wonder. Let them scramble. Tonight, I didn't need to say a word. My presence had already spoken volumes. She found me near the sculpture garden. Regina Langford, with her pearls strung too tight and her smile pulled even tighter. She approached like a cat stepping into a room. It didn't claim tentative territorial. "You seem," she said, pausing as if choosing the word would give her control. "Familiar." "All." I turned toward her slowly, holding my wine glass with just enough elegance to let the diamonds on my wrist catch the light. "I get that a lot," I said, smiling without teeth. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Have we met before?" "Possibly. Though I imagine you've met many women dressed in beige over the years." A flicker. She knew, or almost knew, but the certainty slipped just out of reach. "Well," she said, clearing her throat, "I must say, you carry yourself with remarkable poise." Poise, not wealth, not beauty, not grace. Poise, the thing women like me weren't supposed to have unless someone handed it to us. I leaned in just slightly, lowering my voice. One learns, eventually, not to trip over the weight of other people's expectations. Regina blinked. Before she could respond, a photographer called for group shots. She turned toward the camera with a practiced smile, but her gaze kept flicking back to me. She didn't know who I was, but she knew I wasn't no one. And that was the beginning of her unraveling. The invitations were handwritten, on cream-colored cardstock embossed in gold old money taste, which the Langfords respected more than sincerity. I made sure they were hand-delivered to Charles and Regina's residence, with a note, a small luncheon hosted in gratitude. "I'd be honored by your presence." No return address, just a time, a day, and an RSVP number answered by my assistant, posing as a soft-spoken woman named Lorraine. Ethan was surprised when I mentioned the gathering. "Lunch? You're hosting? Where?" "Oh, just a little place I've kept for special moments," I said lightly, dabbing my napkin. "A change of scenery. You'll like it." He raised a brow. "And Camilla's family is coming too?" I smiled. "Of course. They deserve to be thanked properly, don't you think?" He hesitated, maybe sensing the shift in my tone. But he didn't press. He'd grown used to my passivity, my humility, my simple life. And that was my advantage. For weeks, I'd played my part so well even I started to believe it. But masks get heavy, especially when you're the one holding all the strings. The day before the lunch, I called my staff. Gardeners, chefs, valets, every person I'd paid fairly, promoted from within, and who called me ma'am, not out of fear, but respect. I wanted to be quiet, I told them. Understated, refined, no fanfare, but let there be no confusion. They're walking into my world. I chose my outfit with care. Soft ivory silk. The necklace Ethan once complimented, but assumed belonged to my mother's employer. A watch that had belonged to my late husband restored, ticking steadily like a pulse beneath my skin. Camilla confirmed their arrival. "Looking forward to it," she texted. "Should be fun." She had no idea what was coming. Neither did Ethan. Because for the first time in this entire performance, I wouldn't be playing a role. I'd simply arrive. And let the truth walk in with me. They arrived in 2 black SUVs, Camilla, her parents, and her siblings, all dressed for superiority. Ethan stepped out beside them, looking mildly confused as he glanced up the long, tree-lined driveway. "This isn't a restaurant," Camilla muttered. Charles looked up at the towering iron gates, the cascading stone staircase beyond them. "Whose estate is this?" No one answered. Until I opened the grand double doors and stepped out, sunlight catching the hem of my cream silk dress. "Good afternoon," I said gently, my voice clear. "Welcome." Regina stared, jaw slack. Camilla blinked. Is this? It's mine, I said simply. Please come in. They hesitated. The marble foyer, the sweeping staircase, the oil portraits on the walls, none of them borrowed, all of them mine. The Langfords looked like tourists wandering into a country they didn't know existed. Camilla's sister clutched her clutch tighter. Ethan looked at me like he'd never truly seen me before. Mom, he said slowly. What is this? I met his eyes. A place I've kept quiet, not out of shame, but choice. Charles cleared his throat. You own this? I didn't flinch. For over 20 years. We moved into the sunroom, where lunch was laid out like art. Crystal glasses, porcelain china, silver utensils engraved with my initials. No pretension. Just permanence. Camilla's voice cracked slightly. You never mentioned. No, I said, folding my napkin. I didn't. They sat. Slowly. Like the chairs might collapse under the weight of their assumptions. I watched them. Quiet. Measured. And I realized, power doesn't need to shout. Sometimes it just opens the door and waits. Lunch was served in courses, slow and meticulous sea base with lemon butter, arugula and pear salad, vintage white poured into chilled crystal. Yet no one was eating. Not really. Their forks moved with polite confusion, their eyes darting from one another, waiting for an explanation they couldn't form on their own. I let the silence linger a little longer. Then I placed my napkin gently beside my plate and stood. I think it's time we clear the air, I said softly. You've all been so generous, enduring the company of a poor cleaning lady. But that was never the full story. Regina flinched. Charles froze mid-sip. Camilla shifted in her chair, eyes narrowing. Ethan? He just looked lost, like someone watching the sky turn upside down. My name is Eloise Waverly Monroe, I said. I inherited nothing. I built my life from loss. After my husband passed, I raised our son and grew a small cleaning business into a regional chain. Sold it quietly, invested smartly. I own this estate. A vineyard in Sonoma, a commercial block in Lower Manhattan, and as of last year, a seat on the board of Altram Capital. Gasps. Even Camilla's arrogant brother dropped his fork. I turned to Charles. You asked me once what I do for work. I manage assets now. Mostly mine. Ethan blinked. Mom, what are you saying? I'm saying, I said, looking into his eyes. I let you believe a version of me you were comfortable with, because I needed to know what kind of man you'd become, what kind of woman you'd love, what kind of family you'd walk into. Regina opened her mouth, but nothing came out, just silence. I glanced around the table. I wore old shoes and kept quiet because I wanted to see the truth without the filter of money or status. I paused, then let the words fall, and I saw everything I needed to see. Camilla's grip on her wineglass tightened. Her smile had vanished. Her face paled. The room had changed. The table had turned. And now the real story could begin. It didn't take long. Camilla leaned forward, her voice brittle with tension. You've been spying on us? No, I said calmly. I've been observing. There's a difference. Regina sputtered. This is manipulation. I turned to her. And mocking a woman over dinner, reducing her worth to her shoes, is that honesty? Camilla's mask cracked. You lied to all of us. I tilted my head. Did I? Or did I just let you reveal yourselves? Ethan finally spoke. Camilla, is this true? What you said about my mom, was that real? Camilla's eyes flashed. I was frustrated. I didn't mean. I pulled a sleek black tablet from my bag and tapped the screen. Her voice, clear as crystal, played through the room. She's practically a peasant. Once we're married, I'll push him toward a board seat. Cut the strings. Camilla's face drained of all color. A second clip followed a brunch recording, laughter folded into venom. He's sweet but naive. If I play this right, I won't have to deal with the mother for long. She lunged forward. You recorded me? You had someone spy on me? I didn't flinch. No, I had someone listen. There's a difference. She turned to Ethan, eyes wild. You believe her over me? Ethan looked gutted. His lips parted, but no words came. The silence was louder than any scream. Camilla rose so fast her chair scraped the floor. You planned this, you twisted everything. I met her rage with steady calm. I protected my son. She snapped. From me? You think I'm some gold-digging monster? I didn't answer. She turned to Ethan, voice shrill. Say something. He didn't. And that silence? It was the beginning of the end. Camilla's fury boiled over. You're a coward, she spat at him. You let her humiliate me. Then she stormed out, heels stabbing the marble like an insult. The echo of her exit hung in the room. No one moved, because sometimes the truth doesn't land with a bang. It lands with a silence that no one can escape. Regina followed Camilla's tantrum with the elegance of a woman trying to hold a crumbling empire together, using only pearls and poise. The moment the echoes of her daughter's heels faded into the hallway, she exhaled sharply, dabbed at her temple with a linen napkin, and forced a smile that had long since lost its sincerity. Well, she began, voice trembling just under the surface of control. Emotions have clearly run high, understandably. But I'm sure we can all agree that a single, tense moment doesn't need to undo what could be a very promising union. Charles didn't speak. His pride had already been gutted 2 courses ago. I tilted my head, curious. A promising union based on deception, manipulation, and contempt? Regina's jaw tightened. Camilla is young, passionate. She speaks without thinking sometimes. But she's not cruel. She's misunderstood. I said nothing. She leaned forward. Let's not let one dinner one afternoon cloud the future. You mean the future where your daughter claws her way into our family for status and leverage? I asked, my tone soft but unyielding. Regina winced. That's unfair. What's unfair, I said slowly, is letting my son walk blindly into a family that saw me as trash before they knew my name. Charles cleared his throat as if preparing to speak, but Regina lifted her hand to silence him. This was her battlefield now. Her performance? She tried a new tactic. You're a mother, Mrs. Monroe. Surely you understand what it's like to want the best for your child. Camilla, she only wanted to secure a good future. Perhaps she went about it poorly, but her intentions were to reshape Ethan into someone else, into someone profitable. She blinked. Regina Langford, the woman who once looked down on my worn shoes and thrifted coat, now sat in my sunroom begging for mercy with veiled diplomacy. But I wasn't cruel. I wasn't cold. I was simply done pretending. I'm sure Camilla will find someone else to manage, I said quietly. Someone who doesn't come with a mother like me. Her eyes darkened. I stood. You're welcome to finish dessert. Then I turned and walked out. Because when desperation shows up dressed in pearls, you don't need to stay and watch her unravel. You just need to close the door softly behind her. We stood on the balcony of the East Wing. Just the 2 of us. The afternoon sun cast a quiet glow across the estate, softening everything but the tension in Ethan's shoulders. He hadn't said much since Camilla's exit. He sat through the rest of the luncheon like a man trying to wake from a dream he didn't know he'd fallen into. But now, it was time. I turned to him. You have a choice, Ethan. He looked at me, really looked at me. Like the boy who once held my hand at funerals and scraped knees was still somewhere inside the man in front of me. You can marry her, I said. Pretend none of this happened. Align with her family, salvage your image, keep the investors happy. He stared ahead, silent. Or, I continued, you can walk away, with your integrity, with your name, with the part of you that knows what love is supposed to feel like. He let out a shaky breath. Mom, why didn't you ever tell me? I smiled sadly. Because I wanted you to grow without the shadow of money. I wanted you to value people, not portfolios. And because I needed to know if you'd fight for the right things when no one was watching. His eyes reddened. I thought I knew Camilla. We all think we know people, I said gently, until they show us who they are when they think we're beneath them. He looked down, his voice barely above a whisper. She would have married me for my startup. I said nothing. He nodded slowly. Then I'm done. And just like that, something shifted in him. A weight lifted. Not the kind that makes you lighter, The kind that makes you taller. He turned to me, a quiet strength settling behind his eyes. I'll walk away. I reached for his hand. Then you'll walk the right way. For the first time all day, he smiled. It was small, but it was real. And in that moment, I didn't see the boy I raised. I saw the man I'd hoped he'd become. Camilla came back. I wasn't sure she would, but I knew if she did, it wouldn't be with humility. She arrived 2 days later, unannounced, uninvited, wearing designer sunglasses too large for her face and a coat that looked like it had never known a wrinkle. Her heels tapped the marble foyer like war drums, and for a moment, I thought she'd rehearsed the whole entrance in her car. Maybe even in the mirror. Ethan stood behind me, quiet. She looked at him first, not me. Ethan, please, you know I didn't mean any of it like that. He didn't respond. She turned to me, her voice softer now, cracked around the edges. Mrs. Monroe, Eloise, I was nervous. I wanted you to like me. I was just trying to impress my family. By humiliating mine? I asked, arms crossed. She blinked rapidly. I made a mistake, all right. But we can move past it. You're powerful, brilliant, I admire you. You've built so much. Maybe I could learn from you. She trailed off, her words sagging under their own weight. I watched her, then really watched her, and saw the layers peeling. Not just entitlement, but fear. The kind of fear people have when the scaffolding they've built their lives on starts to buckle. She wasn't just begging for Ethan. She was begging for safety. For the idea of security wrapped in a last name and a balance sheet. I love him, she said suddenly. I know I don't show it the right way, but I do. Ethan still said nothing. She took a breath, tried one last time. We could build something amazing together, your company, my family's connections. I'm sorry, we all said things, but we're still a good match. I stepped forward, calm and slow, and said the only thing I needed to. Money can't buy blood. Camilla's face cracked. Her bottom lip quivered, then steadied, then collapsed again. Please, she whispered, tears finally pushing past the steel. I didn't want to lose this. You never had it, I said. She turned to Ethan one final time, but he only looked away. And just like that, the woman who once laughed behind linen napkins and whispered cruel jokes at my expense stood alone, unraveling. And no one reached to hold her together. The house was quiet again. The kind of quiet that follows storms, the kind that feels earned, but not entirely peaceful. There's always something left to sweep up. Something heavy still lingering in the corners. Ethan and I sat on the veranda. No wine, no words, just the brittle sound of wind brushing through the hedges. He hadn't spoken since Camilla left. When he finally did, his voice cracked. Mom, I'm sorry. I didn't say anything yet. I waited. I let them treat you like nothing. I should have stopped it. I should have. You were trying to keep the peace, I said softly. I've done that before too. He looked down at his hands like they belonged to someone else. I didn't want to lose her, or the dream I thought we had, but I lost myself instead. I reached for his hand, fingers warm against mine. I know, I feel ashamed. I nodded. You should, but shame isn't the end. It's the start of becoming something better. He looked at me then, and I saw the boy I'd raised, raw, flawed, but good underneath it all. I thought you were just a retired cleaner, he said with a weak smile. I never asked who you really were. You weren't supposed to, I replied. Not yet, he swallowed. I want to earn it back, your trust. You already are, I said. He sat back, let the silence stretch again, this time not out of shame, but reflection. I didn't forgive him because I had to. I forgave him because every part of him that mattered, the part that listened, that changed, that stayed, was still intact. And that's the part of a son a mother waits for. Sometimes, forgiveness isn't a reward. It's a reunion. 2 weeks passed. The Langfords faded into silence, like a bad dream I no longer needed to recount. Camilla's name wasn't mentioned again, not out of spite, but because it no longer belonged in the story Ethan and I were writing now. That morning, I called him to the study. He looked more rested these days. Lighter, the kind of man no longer chasing someone else's version of success. He walked in with cautious curiosity he'd learned by now that I didn't summon people without purpose. I've been thinking, I said. sliding a folder across the desk. He opened it, eyes darting over the documents, legal papers, brand identity mock-ups, early-stage mission drafts. It took him a moment. Then his brow furrowed. "This is a foundation?" I nodded. "In your name." He blinked. "For working-class youth," I finished. "Young people with bright ideas but no access. Kids who don't have Langford last names or marble foyers. Just hunger, hustle, and heart." He looked stunned. "Mom, I didn't build my life to hoard it," I said. "I built it so one day we could open doors for others." He sat down slowly, overwhelmed. "But why now?" "Because now you understand what it means to be overlooked, to be underestimated, and you're no longer trying to impress the people who did it." He let out a long breath, staring at the documents again. "We'll fund mentorships, scholarships, and starter grants," I explained. "Give them tools, a seat at the table." Ethan's voice was low, reverent. "This is bigger than my startup." I smiled. It always was. He stood up and walked around the desk to hug me, not the casual, polite kind, but something deeper, something final, like the hug of a son who finally saw the whole woman behind the word mother. We stayed there for a moment, quiet, and in that quiet, I realized something. Money wasn't the legacy. He was. And what we chose to build together next would define us far more than what nearly destroyed us. The sun was beginning to dip, staining the sky in that warm honey color I loved most. I walked slowly through the rose garden behind my home, hands trailing lightly over petals that had bloomed without fanfare, without applause. Just like I had. Each flower felt like a memory, some sharp, some soft. The white roses reminded me of my husband. The deep red ones were for the years I spent fighting for air while everyone else climbed ladders. The yellow ones? Those were new. They reminded me of Ethan's laugh when it finally returned. A gentle wind stirred the leaves, and I closed my eyes for a moment. I had let them see me as small. On purpose? Not because I lacked pride, but because sometimes humility is the sharpest blade in the drawer. Sometimes the best way to learn someone's character is to let them think they're above you. I remembered Camilla's scoff when she saw my old coat, Regina's half smile, Charles's silence, the whispers, the cruelty wrapped in caviar. But I also remembered Ethan's eyes when he chose truth over status. I didn't need to prove anything anymore. The estate behind me stood tall, quiet in its elegance. The foundation paperwork had already been filed. The first round of applicants, kids from forgotten zip codes, would be reviewed by month's end. I touched the pendant around my neck, the one I used to keep tucked beneath my shirt. Now it sat proudly in view. The world hadn't changed much. People still judged too quickly, still worshiped the wrong things. But I had changed, and so had my son. As I reached the end of the path, I turned once more to look at the house bathed in amber light, strong and still. And I whispered the truth I'd learned too late, but just in time. Sometimes, to see a person's true nature, you have to let them look down on you first.